Chapter 4 Fairy Island. Flying northwest, they finally approached Fairy Island. It was larger than Maylene, but smaller than Fathia. There were many trees. It almost looked like Maylene except for the colorful flowers and numerous butterflies. Like she had been told before, there were fields upon numerous fields of all varieties of flowers, most of which she had never seen before. Farisef landed smoothly between a row of daisies and tulips and let Trillium down. They pranced happily through the space between the rows where nothing grew. They wouldn't want to trample the delicate things. They smelled deliciously sweet to her, and they took turns smelling them. They felt full of life. This is a wonderful place. Trillium was very impressed. She had thought the glass castle a marvel, but this land was most enchanting. Farisef picked a daisy, although he knew not of its name, and placed it in Trillium's long curly hair. She smiled sweetly at him, sat down, and motioned him to do the same. He did. Trapped in each other's eyes again, they were unaware of someone approaching. A hand rested on Farisef's shoulder. He jumped, a bit startled. It was a woman, the fairy woman from Trillium's dreams. She wore a very fancy dress full of wonderful colors and design. Her long, straight brown hair hung below her waist. "My name is Eternity. I am the Chantress. Who are thee?" her voice sang. They in return introduced themselves to the fairy. "I welcome you, Child of Harmony and Prince of Josephera, although strangers are not welcome here. The Dark Ones have been killing fairies by the dozens. We have no protection against them, and strangers make us very nervous," Eternity warned. She was a large fairy about 5 feet tall, and one of the last of them alive. She was very pretty. Her light blue eyes sparkled. "Queen Esmeralda would have been pleased to see you, but now you've gotten yourself into quite a fix." "What do you mean?" "It is unlawful to pick any flowers in these fields. You've committed quite a serious crime." Farisef began to worry a bit, but was relieved to see Trillium's reassurance and strength in her eyes. He wondered how she could be so calm at such an uncomfortable time. "What's going to happen to me?" he asked. "Usually being a stranger and picking our most precious flowers would be subject to face the queen and her court. You would be sentenced to the most severe punishment, but there may be a way to escape your capture." A drum sounded from behind the trees. Another large fairy appeared with a drum that hung from a strap over his back. He approached Eternity. They looked like they could be brother and sister, their eyes the same sky blue. She remembered that all of the Adrellas had blue eyes. They watched the fairies with delight as they were entertained. "I haven't heard music for many summers," Trillium told Farisef. Eternity began to sing with Garrett's drum. She sang songs of the fairies and about reuniting the creatures. Although the strangers did not quite understand the song and all of its meaning, they enjoyed it immensely. The 2 large fairies grew silent, and the drummer approached them. The music had made Farisef, as well as Trillium, forget about his crime. The male fairy was taller than the Chantress. He had friendly eyes and a sophisticated look about him. His hair was dark brown and dreaded wildly. His hair hung like ropes to the middle of his back. He slowly came towards them and knelt next to the 2 strangers. "My name is Garrett. I am the drummer and close companion of our queen." "Are you going to kill us?" Farisef asked. "No," Garrett laughed. "We do nothing of that sort. If the queen sentenced you, you would have to stay and help tend the fields for 2 summers. "He cannot," Trillium rejected. He needs to help me fight the wizards." "I understand that you are the Child of Harmony and have duties to fulfill, but your friend has broken a very serious rule and cannot go unpunished. There is only one way that you can be forgiven and be on your way. Will you take my offer?" the drummer asked. "Yes," they both answered together. "The guard will be here shortly to take you to the queen. Follow me." Garrett led them out of the flower fields into a thick of trees to the west. He took them into the center of Trick Forest, where they would not be found. When they reached the middle, Garrett stopped, and they all sat down together. The drummer opened his medicine bag that hung loosely from his neck. He took out a fairy potion. "What is it?" Farisef asked Trillium. "A potion, I think." "Yes," Garrett replied. "Now drink it, and all will be forgiven, and you will be free to leave." They each drank half, and Garrett slung his drum around and began to play. Garrett played peaceful rhythms, and no words were spoken for some time. The strangers began to feel quite awed. They could see a glowing aura radiating from the drummer. A green and pink glow surrounded him, and his hands beamed with yellow light that lit up his drum when he played. Trillium and Phariseph could now see the life inside the trees and plants around them. When he stopped playing, he spoke again. I will leave you now, but don't be afraid. I will send Eternity here to find you in a few hours. Just stay here for now. He stood up with the drum hanging in front and tapped away as he left the forest. Trillium had forgotten the urgency in which she must return the shell. All thoughts of her mission faded as the potion did its work. I feel strange, Trillium giggled. As do I, agreed the prince. Very strange. For an hour they walked around together, but not far, for afraid of getting lost. After an hour of wandering and observing, he sat next to Trillium and put his arm around her. He began to kiss her, unafraid, for there were no eyes upon him now. They made love together in the fairy woods. We must go. You do not love me, Trillium? Yes, but we both have duties to fulfill. This may have been a mistake. There are no mistakes in love. I have to return the shell I forgot. So did I. I care for you, Phariseph, but my mission is not to fall in love. It's to save Havenbell. If I must choose, I choose to be the child of harmony. Phariseph sat dumbstruck. He couldn't believe his ears. He had never felt so drawn to someone before. He knew he was falling for her. He thought for sure that she would express her feelings, but being rejected was not what he had expected. Phariseph was deeply hurt, but he knew she was right. They had already forgotten their mission. We can't leave until Eternity comes to get us. We'll get lost. Nearby, Mutt had accidentally wandered away from eye's view of his companions. He slipped into the woods chasing a small, pesky fairy. It had tricked him and flew off, leaving Mutt very lost. For 15 minutes he roamed around aimlessly and began to give up hope, when he began to hear voices nearby. He crept up slowly, positioning himself closer to the murmurs, and gasped when he saw two very naked bodies. He saw the green amulet. The feather she was with had one too. Could it be, he wondered, not really wanting to believe it. It was not the girl that he recognized. It was her mother's necklace. It was very royal and maybe a sign of the council. That's the child, Mutt sputtered softly. Trillium's stomach did flips. Someone's here, she whispered. The wizards are close. This didn't help Phariseff's mood. Mutt jumped when he heard this, cracking numerous twigs and branches and giving himself away. They both looked in his direction. He was given no power by the Dark Ones, and knew that the child of harmony could kill him in an instant. He ran for help. Hurry, Trillium urged. There is no time to spare. They dressed themselves as fast as lightning and gathered their items quickly. Trillium strung her bow and kept it posed for any surprises. We can't leave. We'll get lost in here without Eternity, said Phariseph. It's even more risky to stay here. They have found us. We must return the shell. They began to walk slowly through the trees. Phariseph felt all too unarmed. Eternity, they shouted. Help us! A large and graceful fairy flew towards them. Without her, the way out would be impossible. Fairies were the only ones who truly knew the forest. Mutt, on the other hand, made it out remarkably in a frantic hurry. He ran fast with his head looking behind him and ran right into de Groot. Mutt panted, out of breath, and barely formed the words. It's her! Master! The girl! Where? de Groot demanded. In the woods. Mutt pointed a gnarled finger in the direction where he had caught the lovers. De Groot raised one side of his mouth into a pompous smirk. His head swam with sick delight. Stay here. I don't want you fouling this up. De Groot slammed Mutt to the ground. Does she have the shell with her? I don't know, Master, Mutt uttered weakly, keeping his eyes on the grass below. De Groot pulled out his short sword. It was made of pure silver and shaped like a curved snake. He shot Mutt an evil glance of hatred and insanity. Mutt kept his eyes on the ground, but he could see the fire in de Groot's eyes, feel the fire in his eyes. He could feel it through every pore. Behind the fire that danced wickedly in his black, empty eyes lay only two things. Mutt knew very well what those were: rage and murder. De Groot fled off to the forest like a madman. One phrase echoed over and over in his head like a bad song. I want her for myself. Oh, how I want her for myself. Eternity guided them through the trees. Trillium and Phariseph walked back to back, scanning the surroundings with weapons alert. Trillium noticed that her awareness of the dark presence was much weaker in Fairy Island, the reason she could not figure. De Groot crept into the forest, not venturing in very far before he could hear the voices, and lowered himself down into the brush. He hunkered down low and silently covered himself with a couple of branches and vines. He could not disappear like his father, but his skin changed and his mind could change other creatures' awareness of him. He was nothing but a pile of shadows in the dark. He hardly even breathed. In a couple of minutes they would be out of Trick Forest. De Groot heard them coming and could hardly hold his excitement. He attacked Eternity. She collapsed and hit the ground. This put them both in complete shock. For a moment they forgot what their weapons were for, as well as their names. I didn't see him. I didn't even feel him. That should be enough power to create another murder of crows, the ones you slaughtered. Farisef rushed to Groot and swung his heavy branch, but before it made contact, De Groot raised his pasty white palm at Farisef and sent him flying backwards through the air with invisible force. His back hit an old but solid fir tree. He was knocked out cold. His head dropped like a lifeless marionette. "I'll kill you, wizard. You better believe I will." She aimed her arrow at De Groot. "You stupid girl. I've been waiting to meet you, and this is how you welcome me? By telling me that you are in control here? You cannot even compare to my power. I will crush you, and you will fail. If you are lucky, I'll make you a slave." The arrow sliced the air like a flash of lightning. It cut through De Groot's shoulder like a sharp knife through paper. "Ah!" He reeled, trying to throw her like he had Farisef, but he could not move her. She was strong as stone. The amulet around her neck began to shine, a bright beam of green. The pulsating waves weakened De Groot. The light stung his eyes terribly. Trillium did a full backflip, landing with the softest of ease, and shot again. This time the silver arrow pierced through his thigh and began to throb fiercely. He screamed and limped towards her. She was too fast. She slugged him square in the face like a brick that has fallen from great height. De Groot's eyes rolled back into his head and his tongue hung clumsily out of his open mouth. He looked so pitiful lying there that she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She ran to her good companion and began shaking him frantically. "Farisef, come on, wake up." He blinked his eyes slowly. Trillium raised him to his feet. "Oh, come on, wake up." He began to come around, but was burdened by a pounding headache. "We must go now." Farisef saw Eternity, who lay lifeless. It didn't seem real to him. His head was still floating. Trillium had an arm around him. She felt him weaken and held on to him tighter and steadied him. He saw the wizard lying limp with his eyes now shut. "How?" the prince began to ask when De Groot's eyes flew open and both of them jumped. Farisef stood still and Trillium let him go. She took the shell of hope out of her pack and held it in her hand facing De Groot. She saw the instant panic in his eyes and smirked. He screamed. She nodded and Farisef started to lead the way out. He was an excellent navigator and his link to this island was much keener than Trillium's. He knew that he could find the way out. De Groot made effort to stand, but his leg had gone completely numb, and he fell back down hard. His yell echoed through the trees, pushing them along faster. With a few twists and turns, Farisef found their way out of the fairy woods. Outside of the thick trees, Garrett stood waiting for them. A brown horse with a black mane and tail stood next to him. They were surprised when he greeted them. Garrett told Trillium to let the horse smell her. She held her hand out and smiled. "What's his name?" "This is Rex." The horse nodded in acceptance. "I'm afraid that I have no experience with horses." "I'll ride with you. We must hurry." Garrett hopped on Rex and Farisef helped her on. Garrett tapped the sides of the horse and Rex began to run. Farisef flew behind them. She realized that Garrett carried no drum. Lar saw Mutt curled up and shaking and went to kick his ass into gear. When Mutt told Lar about the girl in the woods, Lar had become very furious. When he found out that De Groot went alone to find her, Mutt earned a blinding smack across the face. "You idiot! She's mine, not his!" Lar charged off into the woods to find them. He dragged his staff upon the ground, making a long trail to find his way out. On his staff, made of cherry wood, was a beautiful carved ball on the top. Above it sat a nasty little imp, a most demonic creature and gruesome pet. It had long yellow claws, its face was twisted, and its eyes possessed frightening evil. He rummaged through the dense forest. When he saw the slain fairy, his eyes grew large. Big fairies are very magical. Lar crouched down and let the imp collect small portions of blood. Blood from a fairy would come in handy later. A rush overtook him. De Groot watched him intensely. "She's mine! Don't even think about it!" De Groot threatened. Lars saw just how weak de Groot looked and laughed harshly at him. You are in no position to fight me. Looks like the little girl whooped you good. Shut up, de Groot mumbled. He realized he was not the one in control here and began to get very nervous. What are you going to do to me? Whatever we please, Lar replied and let out a bellow of ghoulish laughter. The fairy is mine now, Lar confirmed. The imp jumped off the staff and hopped like a rabbit to de Groot. Get that thing away from me! He screamed and kicked, while Lar sacked the large fairy for his return to the cave. Lar then killed de Groot. Less competition that way, and de Groot had the power of moving things. The imp took some of his blood too. Blood from a wizard would also come in handy. The imp jumped back into the staff. Lars slung the bag of fairies over his shoulder and followed his staff trail out of the woods. The effects of the potion were almost completely gone now. It still made no sense to them how the potion had made them forgiven. It was a different land with different rules. They could see acres of flower fields. They stretched to the horizon. No time to learn about them now. The palace came into view. A large white tower stood up like a large tree. It was beautiful even for being half destroyed. Fairy Island was even more beautiful than Duran had described. They walked up the marble steps, clacking as they went. Many small fairies fluttered about. 2 larger fairies guarded the entrance. They wore blue robes, both of them men. They smiled when they saw Garrett, but they eyed the strangers with mistrust. Halt! Who are these strangers? The first one demanded. Brought here by Queen Esmeralda's request, he answered. Go. The second one pointed to the door. They walked inside slowly to admire the temple's beauty. Diamonds and crystals hung from the ceiling like a bundle of sparkling stars. Elegant paintings were upon the walls, but unlike the feathers that only had pictures of them, the fairies had pictures of all of the creatures, new and old. There were even a couple that neither Trillium nor Farisef could identify. There was a large white door that glittered like Trillium's sandals. Upon it was a carved orchid flower. Garrett pushed it open. The queen sat on her bed with her face in her hands. She looked up startled, the stain of tears on her cheeks. Who are these? She asked in her high, dainty voice. Garrett knelt before her, and Trillium and Farisef nervously did the same. No one laughed this time. Trillium bowed and approached the queen. I am Trillium, the child of Harmony, and I have something that belongs to you. Lar and his goblin army traveled swiftly across the land. They had caught about 30 small fairies altogether. It was good, but not good enough for Jade's taste. They continued to search for more, but could not find any. All of the fairies had been alarmed by the call of the horn and were now hiding. Lars smiled, stretched across his handsome face. The gorillas headed towards the palace. We must follow her. She has to be stopped. The goblin army began to rush towards the tower. Mutt was aware that Lar had come back alone. He might be clumsy, but he wasn't stupid. He had a good idea of what had happened to de Groot and would dare not ask about it. Neither would the slave army, for they knew, too, the wrath of Lar. Attention, my wonderful fairies, Esmeralda announced to her people from the second story of her tower. The top was too weak to take the chance of announcing from the usual spot. Today is a very special day for us. May I introduce our new friend and trusted ally, Trillium, the child of Harmony. There was a brief silence, and then oohs and ahs came out of the crowd in unison. Then the noise began to escalate into joyous shouts, cheers, and applause. Shh! Lar yelled and told his pack of goblins. He could barely make out the words. The half-breed has been gracious enough to find our long-lost shell of hope. We shall be saved, she rejoiced. Run! Now! Lar called out. Esmeralda gave the shell to a small fairy that could barely lift it. She flew it to the top of the tower and locked it in place at the top. When it was placed in the holder, a brilliant pink beam covered the sky like caramel on a candied apple. The force field returned, and the wizards were caught inside. Their skin began to burn. The goblins screamed terribly. Their skin blistered before their eyes. Lar howled. His skin was becoming flawed like everyone else's. Noctus ortus phalange de tremidoc, Lars shouted. He had magic. The fire dragon appeared, but only the fiery surface of him, not his whole form, to let them escape. The eye was still in the hands of the Dark Ones, but the shield of the shell was still painful and useful. The dragon had no power to attack, and that was good enough to satisfy the fairies. Mutt thought for sure that they were all going to die, stuck inside the shell's pink aura. Lar had saved them all, and saved the fairies for the brew. As the wizards retreated, their fire burned brightly, and all of the fairies watched as they flew off of the island, leaving a trail of screams behind them. They will not return. Their days of fairy slaying will stop, I promise, Trillium told the fairies. I must go now. I will protect you. The fairy queen pardoned the crowd. They were now very happy indeed. She thanked Trillium. I have a gift for you, and it's a rare one. They followed Esmeralda and her guards to the gardens behind her temple. There were large empty fields and meadows where many horses ran wild. Trillium was speechless. She very vaguely remembered the horses from Phaedia. Rex was the first she had seen for many summers. Phariseph was silent and strong. He brightened when Esmeralda led them to a small stable. Inside the stall, horses were being cleaned and brushed. In the last stall was a beautiful white horse with a long, wavy mane. Her name is Ivory, Esmeralda told her, and she is very special to me. Show them your stuff, Ivory. The horse whinnied, and from its body stretched two massive wings. Phariseph and Trillium were filled with delight and curiosity. I have never seen a winged horse before, nor have I. Nobody knows of its existence except for me and the council. She's been around as long as I have, and I hope you take very good care of her. Me? But I have no experience with horses. She's a Pegasus, and you will take care of her fine. Your friend has wings, and now you do too. Thank you, Your Majesty. I don't know how to thank you. You're very welcome. Just protect her well. Creatures shall see her where you go, so be careful. I will. After a little hesitation, Trillium looked the queen in the eyes and told her that Eternity had not made it out of the woods. I know, the queen responded. I can feel each death of my fairies. She was very loved here. She was my brother's daughter. She died for you. She died for all of us. Now that the shell is in place again, she has saved many others. Hearing that Eternity had been niece to the fairy queen was like taking a blow to the stomach. It seemed as if the punishment was higher for picking flowers than killing a well-loved fairy. It had not really been her fault, but she felt it was her responsibility to protect her. She could have lost Phariseph or the shell as well. Esmeralda let them pet and feed Ivory from their hands. They themselves hadn't eaten since the night before, and now it was nearing early evening. Esmeralda invited them both to stay a few days and get to know more of her beautiful island. Trillium agreed despite of what the council had wanted. She was not sure if they wanted her to rush. Now that the shell had been returned, it was time to rest. They needed it, and the journey home would be no picnic. So she decided, yes, a short vacation would be nice. They were fed the best food that Havenville had to offer. Both were very impressed at how delicious the food was. With the shell returned, the fairies could now rebuild the White Temple, with a little physical labor and a hint of magic. The wizards had gotten close, too close. If the queen had been killed, the fairies would lose their joy and spirit. The Dark Ones would have killed all of them to keep the council from gaining power. Although the shell protected against the wizards, it still wasn't truly safe until the eye of the temple was returned. It is what held the main force field. Esmeralda gave them a tour of her palace. Some fairies were working on the damage, and it looked a lot better than before. The fairies were friendly and showed bundles of hospitality. They were a very merry bunch, and all of them seemed to accept them. The queen brought them down a long, narrow hallway and came to a door on the left where a huge pine tree was carved on the white door. In that instant, she understood how deeply she missed Maylene. She longed to see her stone house, her garden and flowers. She even longed to run throughout the maze again from start to finish, just for fun. She liked the maze much better now that she was out of it, and was eager to meet the creatures, the creators of the maze, and the strangers. Phariseph opened the door slowly. Inside was a spacious and very dreamy room. This room was untouched by the wizard's fire. Pieces of rock inside the walls made them sparkle with each step. It was a square room with two big tombstone-shaped windows that faced west. Trillium looked out at the sunset that left a brilliant pink, orange, and yellow hue on the clouds. The room overlooked the palace grounds, and she could see many flower fields. Crystals hung like stars, and there was a moon mural above it. There was a large bed in the center that had a canopy of flowing lace. Trillium thought the room in Josephera had been nice, but this was incredible. It's amazing, she told the old fairy. We have been waiting for many summers for you to come to us. You have done so much already, Trillium. You deserve the best, and now you shall receive it. I shall see you again in the morning. Good night." She pulled some nightclothes out of a wooden bureau and left it for them in a big velvet chair. "Where will I sleep?" Verisov asked. Esmeralda smiled. "In here. Good night." She turned and fluttered to the door. As she opened it, she smiled at Trillium and floated away. The door closed silently. "I hope you don't mind," Verisov asked. "No, it's all right. I'd much rather have some company anyway." She motioned towards the bed, and they both sat down. "Trillium?" "Yes?" Trillium sprawled herself on the bed and looked up at the hanging crystals. Then she looked at Verisov. She wanted to love him, and she did love him, but knew it would be disastrous, especially after the way the girls in Josephera treated her for wearing their clothes. "Trill, why didn't you kill the wizard in the forest? You're more than capable of it." "I just could not do it yet." "He wanted to kill you." "I know, but I've never killed anyone of flesh. I know I can, but I figured if I crippled him, he'd get stuck in the beams of the shell and die anyway. That is, at least if nobody rescued him. I may be a sworn warrior, but I still feel, you know." "Yes, I know." They were getting very tired and decided to rest for the night. Verisov offered to sleep on one of the 3 lush chairs inside the room, but Trillium refused, and his eyes brightened. She picked up the nightgown and draped it over her head. He lay down beside her. They held each other tight as they drifted to sleep. They both had fiery dreams and images of ruthless wizards. Lar returned to the cave with Mutt and the goblins. Jade was getting impatient for her brew, and the others were grateful for Lar's return. "Where's de Groot?" Jade demanded. "The Child of Harmony injured him, and he got trapped in the shield when the shell was put into place." "The girl escaped as well?" "Only temporarily, I promise you." "So de Groot perished from his own stupidity. Doesn't surprise me at all. Good riddance." Jade smiled wickedly. "You old haggard witch! You would all laugh if I wasn't here now, but now we have no master of disguise, so now what?" Nemi began to weep heavily. Jade looked as though fire were shooting from her eyes. "Stop that bawling. It makes you weak." Tolan put a hand on Jade's shoulder. "Calm down. Let her be. We will survive without him. We have no choice. We will corrupt their silly council." "Well, maybe you can live without him, but I can't," Nemi shouted, and then ran to her into Groot's room. The others watched calmly. "I do have a surprise for you. We have 24 small fairies and 1 big one. From the looks of it, she was very old and special." Lar handed the sack to Tolan. "This may be what we need to destroy them," Tolan smirked. Jade lit up instantly. "Mutt, go make some brew!" He took the sack of fairies and began to hobble towards the grub room. Inside was a wooden compressor with wooden cranks and cogwheels that ground and crushed. He started making the brew. The sun rose upon the rows of magic flowers that stretched for over 40 miles across the island of the fairies. The sunbeams danced upon the trees and lit up the remaining snow upon Sprite Mountain to the north. A ray of sun reached through the round window in a golden beam. Trillium squinted as she began to wake, her haunting dreams fading away fast like a desert mirage. Verisov lay quiet in sleep by her side. She watched him closely with curious green eyes. She desperately desired his touch and embrace. She was relieved for the fairy's protection, but her own heart often felt cold and empty. The comfort of a man would have definitely helped out, but he was one she could never have. She let him sleep a little longer, still watching him silently. An hour later, they both redressed in yesterday's clothing and went downstairs to meet and eat with the fairies. All of them, small and large, fluttered about the palace all dressed up in sequined costumes and little dresses with petal-shaped skirts. Roses, daisies, pansies, and tulips danced through the air, giggling. Esmeralda took them outside to the front of the palace. Fairy homes sat in the inside of the crooks of the trees. Every fairy within 20 miles was gathered in one big swarm. They danced through the courtyard, waving their ribbons frantically. When the 2 visitors came into view, the crowd began to cheer. "What is the commotion?" Trillium whispered to Esmeralda. The queen spoke aloud. "Attention, my brothers and sisters. We are gathered together to go on a journey of celebration. We will celebrate 3 things today: the life of our good friend Eternity, the return of the Shell of Hope, and the arrival of the Child of Harmony." The 2 of them exchanged nervous glances. "We will travel north for 50 miles until we reach Babbitt, south of Sprite Mountain. We shall hold our celebration there. A good number of guards will stay here to protect our shell. We must leave immediately, and remember to stay close, my friends." Garrett rode upon Ivory. He wore a long, loose skirt and pants that were splashed with reds and blues. 2 colored bead bands were wrapped around his gnarled brown dreads. His drum bounced upon his back. A string of flowers hung from it, flapping in the breeze. Garrett approached Trillium and pulled gently on the reins. Ivory looked at Trillium and whinnied a greeting. The rare horse shook its head, waving its long, wavy mane. "Good morning, Garrett," Fairclough greeted with a smile. Garrett nodded back in a cool, nonchalant way. He dismounted the gentle beast and helped Trillium upon her. "I shall lead the way, my child. Be swift, my fairies." She opened her wings and lifted into the air. The swarm began to move uphill to the Great Sparrow Lane. Only the jagged tip of Sprite Mountain could be seen on the horizon. The winter snow was melting fast as spring was almost at an end. The melting swelled the river of Zane that stretched across the island east to west. The sun was setting hot and muggy, but the clouds had moved and the rays broke through. Lightning flashed in patches to the north. The wind was soft and carried the soothing, sweet smell of the flower fields. The fairies chattered softly and waved ribbons with glee. Trillium rode next to Esmeralda, letting Ivory run on foot. The trip back to Josephera would take a lot of her strength. Farissa flew to her right. 2 big male fairies flew behind the crowd to make sure no one lost their way. They began to sing a song as they rode by fields laden with all the colors of the rainbow. The cheery high voices rang out like sacred bells. Garrett sang along, but his drum still had no voice. It lay on his back solemnly. "Upon the road we fly and travel, to the hills of Babbitt we will go, past the forest, through these fields, through the magic that we sow. We are grateful for this earth below us, once a land of war and pain. When humans ruled this land of old, this was a city named Zane. Look upon our precious fields, they are alive and much aware. They grow with some attention, so give each of them a stare. Greetings to the morning glories, rising with the sun's light. Good day to all the partridge peas, asters, daisies, and orchids white. We are dancing with the daylily, singing with the yarrows. We are whispering with pickerel weeds and dazing with the mallows. Take a sip of sugar from a yellow cream cup, pollen of the purest kind for a bee. Let's make a dream of shooting stars and roar with fireweed. We love our hanging columbines and all those blue bellflowers. Our meadow beauties are so rare and hold such special powers. Upon the road we fly and travel, to the hills of Babbitt we shall go, past the forest through these fields of magic that we sow." The child of harmony clapped with delight. This place made her feel so cheerful. The aura of these fairies lifted her happiness and joy. "That was wonderful, my friends. These fields are full of splendor and magic. With the shell in place, you and your crops shall flourish again." The fairies cheered happily. Fairclough gazed at her enchanting eyes. He got to travel quite often, but had not been far from Josephera. He knew that this new adventurous life suited him well. His dreams of being a traveler had begun to come true. He was allowed to travel anywhere in Josephera and found secret places on land. It was not every day that you were handed an endurance spell. Fairclough patted his pockets. The potion wasn't there, and he knew they might get sick if they stayed too long. He decided he would not tell her unless he had to. He didn't want to give her bad news at her time of fun. Trick Forest was near now. The path disappeared up ahead. The forest grew across the island to discourage strangers from finding the palace through the woods. Unfortunately, the theft of the Eye of the Temple had crippled its power, allowing the wizards to escape. Esmeralda waved her arms about the air in short circles. 2 bright balls of light surrounded her hands. Her palms rained glittery fairy dust. Everyone watched silent as a wave of great magic shook the trees. It whistled like a howling ghost and made a wave of brilliant yellow light. Ivory shook her head. The trees parted and made a path. The newcomers were a bit startled by this magic. Waves of power surged through the trees, looking like ripples on water. The wind slowly died down and turned from a howl to a whistle, then to silence.